The phone lit up on the counter, one soft glow breaking the quiet. Ethan didn't mean to look, but he did. Just one line, and everything shifted. "You're stronger than you think. I'll be there today." The coffee in his hand went still. The house he'd built, perfect, ordered. Silence suddenly felt too small to breathe in. Outside, a gull screamed across the gray Maine sky, and he wondered when his own life had started sounding like the wind before a storm. She'd once asked for a porch swing. He'd given her marble countertops instead. And now, one message from a name that began with the same letter as his would pull him into the one thing he'd spent years avoiding: the truth about what it costs to build something flawless, and forget to live inside it. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The first sound was the kettle, a soft hiss breaking the hush of early morning. Beyond the kitchen window, fog lay heavy over Rockport Harbor, swallowing the masts of moored boats until they looked like pencils drawn halfway into water. Ethan Caldwell adjusted the coffee mug so that its handle lined perfectly with the oak grain of the island counter. He didn't notice he was doing it. He always did. Order soothed him. A perfect line, a plumb wall, a clean plan. Behind him, Claire hummed a half-remembered tune as she trimmed a handful of peonies from a glass jar. The stems clicked against the shears. The sound was small, deliberate, like someone trying not to disturb a sleeping house. She arranged the flowers into a shallow bowl, turning each one until its petals faced the same direction. The smell of them, sweet and overripe, thickened the air between them. "Supposed to rain later," Ethan said without looking up. Claire didn't turn from the sink. He took a sip, winced at the heat. "You've got the book circle today, at 10, just for a couple hours." He nodded. The silence after their brief exchanges had a weight of its own. It wasn't hostility. It was habit. The practiced pause of two people who knew each other too well to expect surprise. The kitchen, wide and bright, could have been in a magazine: polished brass fixtures, pale cabinets, the faint sheen of waxed floors. Ethan had designed every inch of it, from the exposed beams to the window over the sink that framed the sea like a photograph. And yet, lately, when he walked through it, he felt like a visitor inside his own creation. Claire placed the bowl of peonies on the table, adjusting it a fraction to the left. "There," she murmured, mostly to herself. Ethan checked his watch, though he didn't need to. "I've got a site meeting in Camden, the cottage on Bayview. Might run long?" She nodded. Her hands lingered on the edge of the table, fingertips brushing the wood grain as if reading it. He glanced at her reflection in the window, soft blonde hair tucked behind her ear. Shoulders slightly rounded, like she was carrying something invisible and didn't want anyone to notice. "You still thinking about visiting your sister next week?" he asked. "Maybe." "She's been asking." He grunted approval. Outside, a gull cut through the fog with a sharp cry. They ate breakfast in small bites. The clock ticked. Ethan scrolled through his phone, emails from clients stacking like lumber. Claire wiped a stray petal from the table and watched it cling to her fingertip. "I was going to call the plumber about that drip upstairs," she said. "I'll handle it," he replied automatically. "You said that last month." He lowered the phone, brow tightening. "I've been busy." "Claire." Her eyes met his, calm, not challenging. "I know." That quiet "I know" hit harder than accusation. He looked back at the phone, pretending to read. Minutes later, he set his mug down, precisely in its ring, on the coaster. "We should go over the lake property bids this weekend. I thought Sunday we might drive down to Booth Bay," she said. "They're having the craft fair. You liked it last year. I can't." Deadlines. He meant it, but even as he said it, the words sounded like sawdust, dry and unconvincing. Claire pressed her lips together. Then, maybe next week. Sure. The word landed between them like a door closing. He stood, grabbed his keys from the counter. The jingle echoed faintly. Claire watched him put on his jacket, the navy one she'd given him 5 Christmases ago. The fabric had faded at the cuffs. He hadn't noticed. You want me to pack you something for lunch? She asked. No, I'll grab something on the road. She nodded again, that small practiced smile she used when she didn't expect to be heard. Ethan paused at the door. Don't forget to lock up if you head out early. I won't. The latch clicked softly behind him. Claire stood alone, listening to the wind rattle the screen door. The kettle hissed again. She'd forgotten to turn it off. She poured the remaining hot water over the leftover coffee grounds. Watching the dark swirl rise and fade, the smell filled the room, warm and bitter. For a moment, she pressed her palm to the counter's smooth surface, feeling its coolness, the faint pulse of the house's quiet. Upstairs, a leaky faucet dripped in steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. She almost smiled. Even the plumbing remembered to keep time. Outside, fog rolled off the harbor, lifting in thin veils to reveal a line of sunlight breaking across the water. The day would be beautiful, of course it would. It always was, on the surface. She rinsed the cup, set it beside his on the drying rack, perfectly aligned. Then she sat at the table and stared at the vase of peonies, wondering when beauty had started feeling like air she couldn't breathe. When Ethan returned late that night, the flowers had already begun to wilt, their petals curling inward as if tired of holding their shape. He noticed vaguely, then forgot. The next morning, as dawn spread across the harbor again, another day began, exactly the same, the mug aligned, the silence between them intact, and somewhere inside that silence, something fragile exhaled and disappeared. He didn't yet know that, in less than 24 hours, a single lit screen would change the rhythm of their quiet house forever. The morning after drifted in soft and gray. A thin rain tapped against the kitchen window, tracing tiny rivers down the glass. Ethan stood by the counter, stirring his coffee, watching the way the dark liquid circled the spoon. He liked routines. They steadied him. In a world of shifting deadlines and unreliable subcontractors, at least the first 10 minutes of every morning belonged to order. Claire was upstairs blow-drying her hair, the hum rising and fading through the ceiling. Her phone sat on the counter, plugged into the charger beside the toaster. Its soft glow pulsed once, then again. Ethan glanced at it without meaning to. The screen lit up long enough for a single line to appear. You're stronger than you think. I'll be there today. E. The spoon stopped mid-circle. He blinked once, twice. The message stayed on the screen for another heartbeat before fading to black. Ethan set the spoon down slowly, every muscle suddenly too aware of itself. The hum upstairs went on steady, unaware. He felt his pulse in his jaw, a hard, rhythmic drumming that had nothing to do with caffeine. E. The letter hung in his mind, sharp as a nail. Elliot, the photographer from the reading group. He remembered that truck last week, the box of books, the way Claire's voice had lifted, light and easy, when she thanked the man. The phone buzzed again, a short, vibrating sound that seemed too loud for the quiet kitchen. Ethan's wrist ached suddenly, the same one he'd fractured years ago during a college baseball game. It always twinged before a storm, or when he clenched too hard. He told himself to walk away. Just walk upstairs. Ask her about it. Simple. But his feet didn't move. Instead, he found himself staring at the phone, at that faint line of light leaking from the corner of the screen. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe E was someone from the reading group, or a contact from the grant office. He tried to recall if he'd ever heard her mention an E. Nothing came. Upstairs. The blow-dryer clicked off. Silence followed, heavy. Waiting. Ethan picked up the phone. Just to move it, he told himself, just so it wouldn't fall. The screen lit again under his thumb. A second message had arrived. You don't have to face it alone today. I'll handle the boxes. See you soon. His breath shortened. Handle what boxes? Why did he need to help her? And why hadn't she mentioned it? His stomach tightened like he'd swallowed cold iron. He swiped before he could stop himself. The thread opened a series of brief, familiar messages, words that felt intimate, but not overt. You did well today. Rest. Don't push yourself. Remember what we talked about, small steps. Ethan scrolled, pulse racing. Then he stopped at one from 3 nights ago. You don't need to explain anything to him if it hurts. Just be honest with yourself. His chest burned, an old ache rising jealousy mixed with something uglier, fear. He heard the creak of the upstairs floorboards. Claire was moving around, humming again. The sound felt impossibly normal. He looked at the phone one more time, then hit the home button, blacking out the screen. His reflection flashed faintly a man he barely recognized. Tense shoulders, jaw locked. He slipped the phone into his pocket when footsteps came down the stairs. Claire entered, tying her scarf, cheeks still pink from the hair dryer. "You're up early," she said lightly. "Couldn't sleep," he answered. She poured herself coffee, her back to him. "You have the Bayview meeting today." "Yeah?" His voice came out rough. "You meeting someone this morning?" She turned, a mug in her hand. "Just heading to the depot. Kids group." He nodded, but it felt rehearsed. "Anyone helping you?" "Elliot might drop off the donation boxes," she said after a moment. "Why?" The name struck like a dropped hammer. He forced a casual shrug. "Just wondering, you mentioned him before." Claire smiled faintly, not noticing the tension coiling in him. "He's been helping with the layout. He's good with the kids." "Right," Ethan said, eyes lowering to his cup. He didn't trust his face. She reached for her phone on the counter, then frowned. Did you move my phone?" He froze for half a second too long. "Yeah," he said quickly. "It was buzzing. Thought it might slide off." "Oh." She checked it, thumbed the screen, unreadable expression passing across her face. "Thanks. No problem." She sipped her coffee, eyes elsewhere. "I might be late for dinner. We're sorting some donations tonight." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sure, take your time." The kettle began to whistle softly, filling the space between them. Claire turned it off, then reached for her coat. "Don't work too late yourself," she said gently. "You've been running on fumes." Ethan nodded, the words barely registering. She leaned in to kiss his cheek light. Routine and the scent of her shampoo filled his lungs. When she turned away, his hand almost reached for her sleeve, but stopped halfway. The door clicked behind her. The house fell into the same, too perfect silence. Ethan stood motionless for several seconds, then pulled the phone from his pocket. He stared at the dark screen, thumb hovering. He shouldn't. He knew that. But the thought of not knowing was worse. He swiped again, scrolling farther back. There it was, the first message. Weeks old. "If you're serious about healing, it starts with honesty." Healing from what he read until the words blurred. He realized his hand was shaking, the coffee cooling untouched beside him. Finally. He pressed the screen off and laid the phone back exactly where she'd left it, as if symmetry could erase what he'd seen. Outside, the rain had stopped. The harbor fog was thinning, sunlight cutting through in thin blades. Somewhere, a gull called again, that same sharp cry, impatient and lonely. Ethan watched the light shift across the counter, breathing slow, steady, controlled. He told himself it was probably nothing, but deep inside, beneath all his reason, a small voice whispered that it was already something, something that would not go back to sleep. He picked up his keys, his movements careful, deliberate, like a man diffusing a delicate bomb. As he stepped outside, the screen behind him lit up again, one more unread message blooming quietly into the empty kitchen. The whine of a saw cut through the morning, sharp as panic. Ethan Caldwell stood over a fresh board of white pine, the teeth of the circular blade still spinning. The cut was clean, but short off by a full eighth of an inch. He frowned. He never missed a line. His men knew that. They built their reputations off his precision. Boss Sam Ortega's voice came from behind him. "You good? You usually eyeball that kind of thing, dead on?" Ethan blinked at the board, his mind elsewhere. "Yeah, just distracted." Sam scratched his gray beard, unconvinced. So, you've been distracted since Monday. Wife got you doing honey-do lists again? Ethan forced a laugh. Something like that. The noise of hammers echoed through the framed walls of the Bayview cottage. Still just skeleton studs and wind. The Atlantic shimmered beyond, gulls wheeling low. Normally, Ethan would be measuring light angles, checking grain direction, thinking about design. Today, his thoughts circled like the gulls, restless, repetitive, useless. He reached for the next plank but saw his hands trembling slightly. The image of Claire's glowing phone refused to leave him. "You're stronger than you think. I'll be there today. E." He tried to bury it under sawdust and routine. It didn't work. Sam handed him a nail gun. That storm window order came in. "You want to check the specs?" Ethan stared at the paper, the words blurring. Later, Sam squinted. "You sure you're fine? You look like a guy reading bad news he won't admit he read." Ethan exhaled through his nose, short and tight. "I'm fine. Sam, let's stay on schedule." Sam raised both hands in mock surrender. "Sure thing. Boss." For the next hour, Ethan moved like a machine cutting, measuring, directing, but the rhythm was off. He heard a laugh echo across the open studs, sharp and sudden. It wasn't Claire's, but it pulled up the memory of hers, that quick, low laugh she used to have when he made a joke about the dog tracking mud through the house. He hadn't heard it in months, maybe years. When had she stopped laughing like that? He couldn't remember. At lunch, the crew gathered near the truck tailgate, eating sandwiches and trading stories. Ethan stood apart, pretending to check blueprints. The wind lifted the corner of a sheet, and for an instant he saw not measurements, but Claire sitting at their dining table last week, eating alone after he'd gone to bed early to finish bids. She'd lit one candle, probably for comfort, maybe for company. He hadn't thought much of it then. Now, that single flame felt like a warning flare he'd ignored. He packed up early, telling Sam to finish the checklist. Sam watched him go with a look that said he didn't believe the client meeting excuse for a second. In the truck, Ethan sat with the engine running, phone in hand. He typed into the search bar, E plus Rockport plus photographer. The first result blinked back at him, Elliot Harper, Photography Harbor Light. A community exhibit at the old freight depot, the same depot where Claire spent her afternoons. He scrolled through images, black and white photos of fishermen, rusted anchors, children reading on the dock, and one picture of a woman, blurred by motion, holding a book. Her hair was wind-tossed, familiar. The caption read simply, "Grace in Motion." Ethan's throat tightened. It wasn't clear enough to be sure it was Claire, but he felt it was. He imagined Elliot camera lifted, her unaware, that small private world between photographer and subject. A world of noticing, a world Ethan used to inhabit but had long abandoned. He shut the browser, heart pounding, then opened it again as if repetition might change what he saw. It didn't. The radio hummed low country static. He turned it off. The truck's cabin filled with the sound of rain beginning again, faint and rhythmic. He stared at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked older than 48. There were lines near his eyes he hadn't earned from laughter. He wondered if Claire noticed them. He wondered if Elliot had. The jealousy rose, hot and stupid, mixing with shame. He'd built houses for decades, measured everything by inches and contracts and guarantees. But how did you measure the distance between two people sharing a kitchen table? There were no specs for that, no blueprint. He thought of last year's birthday hers. He'd hired a caterer, set candles, spent more money on dinnerware than on conversation. He'd assumed the gesture meant something. She'd smiled politely, thanked him, and later washed the dishes herself. He hadn't asked if she liked the party. He hadn't asked much of anything in a long time. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him. A text from Sam. "Forgot to ask you want the cedar shipment on Friday." Ethan typed, "Yes," and stopped. The next message came faster, as if his hands bypassed his mind. "What time's the exhibit at the depot?" He deleted it instantly, jaw tightening. He told himself it didn't matter. He wasn't that man, the suspicious kind. Claire deserved better than that. Still, he imagined the depot high windows, dust motes, Claire's laughter echoing with someone else's voice near. By mid-afternoon, the sky cleared into a hard, pale blue. Ethan drove aimlessly, telling himself he was running errands. His route curved through Main Street, past the coffee shop, the bakery, the harbor, then, unplanned. The truck slowed near the freight depot. From the outside, it looked harmless, a long brick building with faded paint, a hand-painted sign, Harbor Readers. Children's drawings taped in the windows fluttered in the breeze. He pulled over at the curb, engine idling. A woman stepped out carrying a box labeled Book Donation. For a moment he thought it was Claire, but it wasn't. Still, the motion, that familiar tilt of the shoulders, the careful grace hit him hard. He gripped the steering wheel. "Drop the estimate," he murmured aloud, as if saying it made it true. That's what he'd tell himself. He was just stopping by to hand off some paperwork for a potential renovation project near the harbor. Not to spy, not to check. He looked down at his clipboard, saw the neat stack of documents waiting for a client on the opposite end of town. It was enough of an excuse. He could walk in, maybe glimpse her, confirm what he already feared or what he already knew wasn't real. A shadow crossed the window. Claire? She was inside, laughing at something out of view. Ethan's breath caught. His thumb tapped the steering wheel, twice, the same rhythm he used when counting measurements. Inhale, exhale. He killed the engine. "Just dropping the estimate," he said again, softer this time, like a prayer or a lie. He stepped out of the truck, the smell of salt and damp paper filling the air. The wind off the harbor tugged at his jacket, and in that small, ordinary moment, Ethan Caldwell, builder of perfect houses, keeper of perfect lines, realized he was walking straight into the messiest place of all doubt. The door of the depot creaked open, letting out a burst of warm light and laughter that didn't belong to him. The day drained itself into dusk, the harbor fading to pewter under a low sky. Ethan parked a block from the old freight depot, telling himself it was coincidence he just happened to be driving by after the client call. He'd even rehearsed what he'd say if someone needed to check that siding job near the pier. It sounded believable, almost professional. The depot stood at the far end of the street, half lit by a flickering lamppost. Its bricks were salt-stained, windows clouded with the grime of old storms. Above the entrance hung a hand-painted sign that read, Harbor Readers, the R's curling like seaweed. In the window, construction paper stars fluttered from a string of twine, each one drawn by a child's uncertain hand. Ethan leaned on his truck door and waited. The air smelled of wet rope and engine oil. It wasn't long before he saw her. Claire stepped out through the depot door, arms full of a cardboard box, her coat collar turned up against the wind. She was laughing, really laughing at something said by the man beside her, Elliot Harper, the name that had been haunting him for days. Elliot lifted the other end of the box, his motion easy, familiar. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of calm that drew people in. His truck idled by the curb, headlights cutting through the fog. Ethan's breath hitched. From where he stood, the scene looked unbearably gentle, two people working in sync, a rhythm he'd once shared with Claire when they'd built their first house together. He hadn't realized how much he missed that rhythm until now, watching it recreated with someone else. Elliot said something that made her laugh again. She shook her head, strands of hair slipping loose from her clip. The wind caught them, haloed her in light. She handed him the box. "You saved my neck," she said, her voice carrying just enough for Ethan to hear. "I couldn't lift these alone." Elliot smiled, loading the box into his truck bed. "I'll bring the rest tomorrow. Don't strain yourself. It's just books." "Books get heavy," he replied, shutting the tailgate. Ethan couldn't hear the next words, only the cadence warm, unguarded. When Elliot rested a hand briefly on the box, it looked almost like he was touching her arm. Maybe he wasn't, but the illusion was enough. Something inside Ethan went rigid. His fingers clenched around the cold metal of the truck door until his knuckles whitened. Claire waved, turned toward her car. The laugh faded into a quiet smile, the kind of smile Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. She climbed into her Subaru and drove off, taillights glowing red as she disappeared around the corner. Elliot's truck followed minutes later, heading in the opposite direction. Ethan sat there long after both vehicles were gone. His pulse thudded in his throat, a slow, angry drumbeat. He told himself he'd seen nothing truly compromising, just kindness. But the image replayed anyway, her laughter, his name on her lips, that easy familiarity. By the time he started the engine, night had settled fully. The drive home blurred past, a strip of headlights and mist. At every stop sign, he rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd keep his tone calm, reasonable. He wasn't a jealous man. He was a husband asking a question. That was all. When he pulled into their gravel driveway, Claire's Subaru was already there. The kitchen light glowed through the front window, soft and domestic. He sat in the dark for a moment, watching her silhouette move inside the faint shape of her head bending over the counter, the motion of her hand reaching for a cup. He stepped out, gravel crunching under his boots. The door opened before he reached it. "Hey," she said, surprised but not startled. "You're home early." "Yeah." His voice was too steady, the way still water hides a current. She leaned against the doorframe. "Long day." "Not really. I was near the harbor." "Oh, did you stop by the site?" He looked at her, searching her face for guilt and finding only tired kindness. "I saw you," he said. "At the depot?" Her brows lifted slightly. "Okay. With Elliot?" She nodded slowly, cautious. "He was helping me move some books." "Why, I didn't realize you needed help," he said. "You didn't mention it." "I didn't think it mattered." He offered. Ethan crossed his arms. "You seemed close." Her expression changed, not angry, not defensive, just weary. "We were carrying boxes. Ethan, that's all." He touched your arm. She blinked, a tiny pause. He touched the box. They stood in silence, the words echoing off walls that had heard too many polite arguments. Finally, she spoke, her voice lower now. "You think I'm having an affair?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware of how absurd he sounded. "I just saw you laughing. You looked—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "I looked happy," he admitted. The word landed heavy between them. Her eyes softened, but not kindly. "You make that sound like a crime." He looked away. The smell of sawdust clung to his jacket. "I just want to understand what's going on." "What's going on," she said quietly, "is that I found something I care about again. Something that makes me feel useful. That's it." He nodded, but the gesture was hollow. "And Elliot. He's a friend. Ethan. A decent man who volunteers his time. That's all. I don't know if I believe that." Her shoulders sagged. Then maybe that's the real problem. The air between them cooled. Claire brushed past him, her perfume faint lavender and salt. "I'm going to shower," she said. "We can talk later, when you're not looking for proof of something that isn't there." He watched her walk down the hall, the soft thud of her steps fading. The house felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had moved closer. On the table by the door sat her scarf, still damp from the mist. He reached out, fingertips grazing the fabric. It was warm in places, holding the memory of her skin. He sank into a chair, staring at the empty doorway. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the porch light. Through the thin curtains, he saw their reflection in the glass, his own face pale, the dark hallway behind him stretching like an open question. He whispered her name once, softly, but the house gave no answer. And for the first time, Ethan wondered if silence could be louder than shouting. Rain had started again sometime during the night. Ethan woke to the faint tapping against the bedroom window, a slow, uneven rhythm like someone knocking from far away. The space beside him in bed was empty, the sheets cool. Downstairs, he heard movement cabinet doors, the low clatter of dishes. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. It was easier to pretend he hadn't noticed the emptiness. Easier to think this morning was like any other. But even in half darkness, he could feel the shift. Something had cracked. He rose, pulled on a sweatshirt, and followed the faint smell of coffee. Claire stood at the counter, hair damp, mug in hand. The kitchen was bright but cold, every light too harsh. A folded towel lay beside her, stacked with a few clothes. "You're up early," she said without turning. "So are you." She nodded, tracing the rim of her cup. Couldn't sleep. He watched her for a moment. "About last night." She exhaled through her nose. "Ethan, I don't have the energy to argue. I'm not trying to argue. I just need to understand." Claire set the cup down, turning finally to face him. Her eyes looked older this morning, not red from crying, just tired. "What do you want to understand? You and him, the reading thing, the messages?" "Elliot." Her tone wasn't defensive, only resigned. "I already told you. He helps with the reading circle. He drives the boxes because my Subaru's engine light came on 2 weeks ago. He's got a truck. It's not complicated." Ethan folded his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You should have told me." "I tried," she said softly. "You were on a call. You said we'd talk Sunday." He felt the sting of recognition she was right. He remembered brushing her off, thinking it was something trivial. "You could have mentioned it again." She smiled without warmth. "I could have. But after a while, you stop repeating yourself when you realize nobody's really listening." The words landed like small stones dropped in water. He wanted to argue, to insist he did listen. But memory disagreed all those times. She'd started a sentence and he'd already reached for his phone or laptop, nodding through words he didn't absorb. What exactly is this reading group, he asked instead, clinging to logistics like a handrail. "It's for kids from the Harbor District. They come after school, mostly the ones who've fallen behind. We read, we paint. Some of the fishermen's wives donate snacks. Elliot takes photos to help us apply for grants. Grants for books, shelves, repairs." She gestured vaguely toward the window, where gray light pressed against the glass. "The depot's falling apart. We're trying to save it." He studied her. This woman he'd slept beside for 15 years and somehow hadn't noticed becoming a stranger. "You could have told me you were doing something that mattered to you." "I did." Her voice cracked the faintest bit. "You said you were proud of me, then went back to work." He felt heat rising in his chest. "You make it sound like I don't care." "Ethan," she said gently, "you stopped being angry years ago. You stopped being anything." He froze. The words cut with surgical precision. No venom, just truth. "I thought," she went on quietly, "that indifference was safer than fighting, but it turns out silence can bruise just as much." The clock ticked. Rain whispered harder against the windows. He looked away, jaw tight. "So that's it. I'm the villain now." "Nobody's the villain," she said. "We just stopped meeting in the same place." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "What are you saying?" "Claire, I'm saying I need air." She took a breath, steady but shallow. "I'm going to stay with Jenna for a few days. Help her with the twins." He turned sharply. "You're leaving for a few days," she repeated. "Not forever." He wanted to ask if forever was still on the table, but the words tangled in his throat. "You're running away." "I'm resting," she said. "There's a difference." Ethan followed her to the staircase. "You can't just—" "I can," she said softly. "Because if I don't step away, I'll start saying things I can't take back." He stopped. Her tone wasn't angry. It was final, in a way anger never is. She climbed the stairs and returned a few minutes later with a small overnight bag. He watched her fold a sweater, a book, a framed photo of her mother, gestures so calm they felt rehearsed. "Claire," he said, forcing steadiness. "We can fix this. Just talk to me." She met his eyes then, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "Talking hasn't fixed us in a long time." "Ethan." He tried to reach for her arm, but she stepped aside gently, not rejecting, just avoiding. "I'll be back on Sunday," she said. "Feed the dog, don't skip dinner." He nodded, unable to find words that didn't sound like instructions. She looked around the kitchen once more, the counters, the flowers, the faint reflection of them both in the window. Then she slipped her wedding ring off her finger. It made no sound when it touched the napkin beside her coffee cup. "I'm not doing this out of anger," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I just can't keep pretending we're fine." He stared at the ring, a small circle of gold glowing against white linen. "So, this is it. This," she said, "is a pause." Then she picked up her bag and walked toward the door. He followed her to the porch. The rain had eased to a mist. "Claire," he called after her. She turned, waiting. He wanted to tell her to stay, to fight, to forgive anything, but the words refused to come. All that left his mouth was a single broken syllable of her name. She smiled faintly, almost kind. "Take care of yourself." "Okay." The door closed with a softness that hurt more than a slam. Ethan stood there, listening to the sound of her car fade down the wet road until it disappeared completely. When he came back inside, the house smelled of coffee and rain. The silence felt thick, almost tangible. On the table, her ring still caught the light. He sat down across from it, the napkin between them like a border. He reached out but stopped short of touching it, afraid it might feel cold. Somewhere upstairs, a faucet dripped again, steady, patient, relentless. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the empty hallway. The house didn't feel airless anymore. It felt hollow, like something had been removed that was never coming back the same way. And for the first time, Ethan wondered if being right had ever mattered less than being kind. The house groaned that night like an old ship in harbor. Every board, every nail Ethan had driven with his own hands, seemed to sigh under the weight of its quiet. It wasn't the comforting hush of peace, it was the kind that listens back. He stood in the kitchen, the clock blinking 9:37, eating cold chicken over the sink. The faucet dripped in the next room, one drop every 2 seconds. Perfectly timed. He'd meant to fix it last week, maybe last month. Now the sound felt almost intentional, like the house reminding him he'd run out of excuses. The ocean wind came through the cracked window by the stove, smelling of salt and damp pine. He'd built this house to breathe open spaces, high ceilings, clean lines, but now it felt like it exhaled without him. Claire's absence wasn't loud. It was shape-shaped, her mug missing from its hook, her shoes gone from by the door, the air heavier where she used to stand. He rinsed the plate, left it in the rack, and wandered through rooms that looked exactly the same and nothing alike. The living room lamp burned low, catching the soft outline of the chair where she used to read. The throw blanket folded neatly across it felt like a small lie. He wanted to mess it up, to make the space honest again, but couldn't bring himself to move anything. Upstairs, the bedroom smelled faintly of her lavender soap. The indentation on her pillow was fading, a pale shadow against the sheet. He lay down across the bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. For a moment he thought he heard her footsteps downstairs that quick, even rhythm, but it was only the refrigerator humming, steady and indifferent. When sleep came, it was shallow and fractured. He dreamed of sawdust, of hammers, of Claire's voice calling his name across unfinished walls. When he woke, his chest ached, not from the dream, but from what followed it, nothing. By noon, the light outside had turned brittle and cold. Ethan worked in the garage, pretending to tidy up, moving tools from one bench to another. He caught himself checking his phone every few minutes, though no message came. Once, he almost dialed her number, thumb hovering over the call button, but he stopped. He didn't know what he'd say if she answered. A knock came at the side door, 3 short taps familiar. He wiped his hands on a rag and opened it. Sam Ortega stood there, raincoat unzipped, holding a 6-pack. "You look like you could use this," Sam said. Ethan managed a small smile. "You're not wrong." They sat at the kitchen table, bottles sweating between them. Sam didn't ask right away, didn't pry. They drank in near silence, the occasional hum of the refrigerator filling the gaps. Finally. Sam leaned back, the chair creaking. So, she left. Ethan nodded once. For a few days. Sam raised an eyebrow. A few days can stretch. You know, I know. You want to tell me what happened? Ethan shrugged. I accused her of something she didn't do. That'll do it? Sam took another sip. You think she'll come back? She said Sunday. And you believe her? I don't know. Sam looked at him for a long moment. You remember when we were framing that house on Winter Harbor? You dropped your tape measure from the roof, and it landed in the wet cement. Ethan frowned. Yeah. You spent 20 minutes fishing it out, muttering about precision, about how an eighth of an inch mattered. I told you the cement would level it anyway. He paused. You said something then that stuck with me. Ethan glanced up. What's that? You said, everything that lasts needs care while it's still wet. Sam's voice softened. Maybe houses aren't the only thing that works like that. Ethan stared at the bottle in his hands. Guess I forgot my own rule. Maybe. Or maybe you thought she'd always be here to level the mix. They sat in silence again. The wind outside whistled through the cracks in the doorframe. Sam stood after a while, patting Ethan's shoulder. Don't just sit in it, man. Fix what you can fix. Ethan gave a dry laugh. Not sure I know what that is anymore. Start small, Sam said, heading toward the door. Leaky faucet, maybe. When he was gone, the quiet came rushing back. Ethan stared at the condensation ring left by Sam's bottle, the mark spreading slowly across the wood. He could already see Claire's frown if she'd been there to notice it. He rinsed the bottles, lined them neatly in the recycling bin, order against the chaos. Then, restless, he wandered into Claire's study. The door creaked. Afternoon light fell in a long stripe across her desk. Books lay stacked beside a half-burned candle. A wool shawl draped over the chair's back, like she'd only stepped out for a minute. On the windowsill, her reading glasses rested atop a small notebook. He hesitated, then sat down. The room smelled faintly of paper and vanilla wax. Her handwriting filled the pages of a planner, neat, looping letters, appointments crossed out in tidy lines. Harbor readers grant call, Elliot photo submissions, dentist reschedule, nothing incriminating, nothing dramatic, just life. In the top drawer, beneath a few envelopes and a roll of stamps. He found it a sealed letter addressed in her handwriting. To the man I once knew. Ethan froze. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. His thumb brushed the edge of the flap. He thought of opening it, then didn't. Instead, he laid it flat on the desk, staring at the words. Once knew, past tense. The phrase burned quietly, more painful than any accusation. He leaned back in the chair, letting his eyes close. The house creaked again, not settling, but speaking. The wind rattled a loose shutter outside. He whispered into the air, barely audible. I'm still here. The room didn't answer. He left the letter where it was and turned off the light, closing the door behind him. The latch clicked softly, a small, final sound that seemed to echo through the whole house. In the living room, the ocean's breath pressed against the windows, steady and slow, as if the sea itself were reminding him that everything built to last must learn how to bend. The letter sat on the desk for 2 days before Ethan found the courage to open it. He'd passed by it each morning on his way to the kitchen, pretending it wasn't there. He'd cleaned the counters, fixed the dripping faucet, even swept the porch in the rain, anything to keep his hands busy, his eyes elsewhere. But on the third evening, when the fog pressed hard against the windows and the house felt too small to contain his thoughts, he finally gave in. He turned the envelope in his hands. To the man I once knew. The words looked steady, written with care, as if she'd chosen each curve of ink deliberately. He slit the top with a carpenter's knife, the blade whispering against paper. The first line stopped him cold. Ethan, if you're reading this, I didn't mean for you to find it yet, but maybe this is the only way I know to say things out loud. He sank into her chair, the one that still held the faint dip of her weight. His chest tightened. I live in a house you perfected where I do not exist. He read the sentence twice, Then, a third time, the words were simple, almost polite, but they cut like exposed wire. You built it with your hands and your mind, every joint seamless, every corner square. You made it beautiful. Ethan, but somewhere between the blueprints and the paint, I disappeared. You built a home so flawless that there was no room left for anything unfinished, and I am mostly unfinished. His throat worked, but no sound came. The letter continued. I used to dream about teaching again. Literature, maybe. Remember how I'd talk about starting a class for kids who hated reading? You said it was a nice idea, maybe later, when things slow down. That was 8 years ago. Things never slowed down. He remembered that night her excitement, the way she'd leaned over the dinner table with a notebook full of names. He'd smiled, distracted, already checking a quote on his phone. I asked once for a porch swing, not because I wanted furniture, but because I wanted a place for us to sit and be still. You promised you'd build one after the Bayview project. Then came another project, and another. The porch stayed empty. So did I. Ethan closed his eyes. He could see the bare porch even now. Rain pooling where the swing should have been. The next paragraph was softer, almost tender. I know you didn't mean to hurt me. You thought providing was the same as loving. Maybe it was, in your language. But I speak quieter dialects that touch on the shoulder when you walk by. The question asked twice when I don't answer the first time. The opposite of love isn't hate. Ethan, it's indifference. I used to teach that line to my students. I never thought I'd live it. He pressed his palm to his eyes. The words blurred, but he kept reading. We never had children, but I had plans small, ordinary ones. A trip to Nova Scotia, that poetry retreat I bookmarked for us. The garden we said we'd start, all miscarried before they began, buried under blueprints and schedules. I don't blame you entirely. I let it happen too. I thought being patient was the same as being kind. It isn't. He reached the bottom of the page, where her handwriting grew smaller, as if she'd run out of strength. If you ever find this, I want you to know I didn't stop loving you. I just stopped waiting to be seen. The final sentence was written in a lighter stroke, the ink fading toward the end. Take care of the house. Ethan, it deserves to be lived in, not just looked at. He sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, his hand trembling slightly. The edges of the page curled where his thumb had pressed too hard. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters again, that familiar creak like an old question being asked once more. He folded the letter slowly, but the words stayed open inside him. For years he had measured worth by symmetry, by the straightness of a beam, the precision of a joint, the perfection of finish. Now, for the first time, he realized what real imperfection cost. His eyes drifted toward the table, where Claire's ring still rested on the napkin. The late light caught it, throwing a thin halo against the wood. He reached for it, fingers brushing the cool metal. The sight of it brought back a memory so sudden it nearly broke him her hand on his arm years ago. The same ring gleaming in sunlight as she laughed, saying, "We're not perfect, but at least we fit." He pressed the ring into his palm until it hurt. Tears came without warning. He hadn't cried since his father's funeral, when he'd stood at the graveside holding a folded flag and a heart too proud to split open. But now, in the quiet of the house he'd built, something inside him cracked clean through. He bowed his head over the letter, shoulders shaking, the sound of his own breathing rough and uneven. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. When the tears finally slowed, he wiped his face on his sleeve and looked again at the ring. The gold was warm now from his hand, no longer lifeless. He set it back on the napkin, but this time he turned it upright, a small, silent promise. The house around him felt different, not lighter, not yet healed, but listening. The floor creaked under his chair, the boards shifting gently, as if the structure itself were exhaling. Ethan took a deep breath. The ocean wind moved faintly through the cracked window, bringing with it the smell of salt and rain, the same scent that had lingered in her hair. He folded the letter once more and placed it in his jacket pocket, not to hide it, but to keep it close. Outside, the first star appeared through the thinning clouds. He stared at it until his vision blurred again, whispering something that was half apology, half prayer. The house answered with quiet, not the hollow kind this time, but the kind that waits for what comes next. The next morning broke cold and blue, the kind of light that makes everything look honest. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the letter folded neatly beside his coffee cup. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, Claire's words reappeared. You built a home so flawless there was no room left for anything unfinished, and I am mostly unfinished. He read them again, slowly, until the ache dulled into something clearer. Then, for the first time in days, he reached for his phone. He didn't write a defense or a plea, just one line. Tell me where to start. He stared at the message for nearly a minute before pressing send. The screen dimmed, silence followed, but this silence was different. Not absence, but possibility. He poured another cup of coffee, black this time. The ocean outside was rough, crosswinds shoving waves against the rocks. It felt fitting two forces meeting head-on, learning how to bend or break. By mid-morning, he was pacing the living room, the phone still silent. He needed to do something with his hands, or he'd come apart. He grabbed his truck keys, but not before glancing once more at the ring on the napkin. He left it where it was a small, golden promise waiting for its echo. He dialed a number he hadn't used in months. Jenna Price, Claire's sister. She answered on the second ring, surprise clear in her voice. Ethan? Yeah, I just wanted to know how she's doing. A pause, the kind that holds both suspicion and concern. She's getting through the days, Jenna said finally. She's been staying here, but she doesn't sleep much. Is she mad? He asked, hating how small his voice sounded. Mad Jenna gave a sad little laugh. No, just worn down. She goes for drives at night. You know that? Says she can't stand the quiet of your perfect house. Ethan closed his eyes. Yeah, he murmured. I can't either. She misses you, Jenna added softly. But she's scared of going back to how things were. He gripped the phone tighter. I don't want things to be how they were. Then don't just say that, Jenna said. Prove it. Learn who she's become while you were busy being busy. He nodded, though she couldn't see. Thanks, Jen. She hesitated. You should talk to Miriam. Who Dr. Miriam Cole? She's the counselor from the grief group. Claire started seeing her after your dad died. You didn't know Ethan's breath caught? No, I didn't. She's good. Ethan, not easy, but good. After they hung up, Ethan sat for a long moment, the name echoing in his mind. He remembered scrolling through Claire's phone weeks ago, seeing that number, assuming it belonged to Elliot. He opened his contacts, found the listing labeled Dr. M. Cole, and dialed. The line rang 3 times before a calm, measured voice answered. Dr. Cole speaking. Hi, this is Ethan Caldwell. You don't know me, but you know my wife, Claire. There was a pause, then a gentle tone. Yes, Mr. Caldwell. How can I help? He swallowed. I found your number in her phone. I think I owe you an apology. I made some assumptions I shouldn't have. I see. I'm not calling to pry, he said quickly. I just need to understand what she was going through. I think I owe her that much. There was a silence on the line, not cold, thoughtful. Understanding, Dr. Cole said, can't happen secondhand. But if you'd like to talk about what you're going through, I can offer that. Ethan hesitated, caught off guard. I'm not much for therapy. Then think of it as building inspection, she said lightly. You know structures, don't you? He let out a shaky breath that almost became a laugh. Yeah, I guess I do. Come in tomorrow at 10, she said. We'll take a look at your foundation. The office sat above a bookstore on Main Street, walls lined with old prints of lighthouses and foggy harbors. Dr. Cole was in her 60s, silver hair clipped neatly, eyes kind but unsparing. She gestured toward a chair. So, Ethan, she began, tell me what you've been trying to hold together. He stared at the floorboards. Everything. And how's that working out? He almost smiled. Not great. She nodded, waiting. I thought if I kept things perfect, he said slowly, they wouldn't fall apart. The business, the house, the marriage. But I think I just built walls so strong that nothing, not even love, could get through. Walls keep things out, she said gently. But they also keep you in. He looked up. She said I stopped being anything. That's grief, Dr. Cole replied. Not for death, but for what's been lost quietly over time. I read her letter. He said there was no affair, just emptiness. I didn't see it happening. Dr. Cole folded her hands. Most people don't. We mistake silence for peace until it's too loud to ignore. He nodded, feeling the sting of truth. You can't sand a heart smooth, Mr. Caldwell, she continued. You can't make it flawless. You must learn to touch a splinter without flinching. The words settled into him like rain soaking dry earth. He exhaled slowly. So, what do I do? Start with presence, she said. Not perfection. Call her. But don't ask her to come home. Ask how she's breathing. Mean it. He thought of the message he'd sent that morning. Tell me where to start. Maybe it was a good beginning after all. As he left, the wind outside caught the door, a sudden rush that made him squint. The air smelled of salt and sawdust, old and clean. He stood on the steps, the town stretching before him, thinking how every repair he'd ever made started the same way, by admitting what was broken. That evening, he drove to the edge of the harbor and watched the sky turn from gold to gray. The phone buzzed beside him, a message from Claire Start by listening. He smiled faintly, tears threatening again. For the first time in a long while, he didn't look away from the horizon. The wind pressed against the truck, steady and cold, but he stayed there until night came, learning how to be still without being silent. The next Saturday, the morning sun came clean and sharp, the kind that makes glass look thinner, air look new. Ethan hadn't planned to drive anywhere. He'd promised himself that he'd give Claire space. But when he found her old planner still open on the desk, a note circled in blue ink caught his eye. Saturday 11 Harbor Readers Children's Hour. The words tugged at him. He hesitated for half an hour before giving in. He told himself it wasn't to spy, not anymore. He just wanted to see what she'd built, to understand the parts of her life that existed beyond the walls he'd made. By the time he reached the old freight depot, the parking lot was full minivans, bicycles chained to posts, chalk drawings smeared across the pavement. The sign above the door looked brighter somehow, its hand-painted letters touched up, Harbor Readers outlined in soft navy blue. He stood outside for a long time, the smell of old wood and sea air surrounding him. Then he pushed the door open quietly and stepped inside. Warmth hit first, the kind that comes not from heaters but from laughter. The wide room was filled with children sitting cross-legged on rugs, books open in their laps, paper stars hung from the ceiling. Someone had strung white Christmas lights across the beams, their soft glow trembling in the daylight. And there she was. Claire sat on a low wooden stool in front of the kids, reading Charlotte's Web. Her voice carried across the room, gentle, animated, full of warmth he hadn't heard in years. She was doing the voices Wilbur's nervous squeak, Charlotte's calm wisdom, and the children were laughing, leaning forward, completely entranced. Ethan stood by the doorway, frozen. He felt something shift inside him, awe and shame intertwining. How many times had she offered him this version of herself, waiting for him to notice? At the back of the room, a man adjusted a camera on a tripod. Elliot Harper. He was older than Ethan expected, maybe mid-50s, with silver hair and a quiet posture, a widower's kind of gentleness. He didn't move with the easy confidence Ethan had feared, more with patience, care. He took photos of the kids, not of Claire, his face calm, almost reverent. Ethan felt the tight knot in his chest loosen, replaced by something softer. Claire turned a page and looked up, mid-sentence. Her eyes caught his only for a second. Surprise flickered, then something unreadable caution. Maybe, but not anger. She didn't stop reading. She smiled at a little girl tugging on her sleeve and went on, voice steady. Ethan stayed near the door, unnoticed by most. His eyes traveled around the room, handmade shelves, baskets of books, a mural half-finished along one wall showing the town harbor in watercolor blues. Near the window, taped to the peeling plaster, hung a sheet of paper yellowed with age lines drawn in graphite, neat and precise. He stepped closer. It was one of his blueprints. His name was still in the corner, Ethan Caldwell. Draft revision, 2009. Rockport Depot redevelopment. A project that never happened. The town council had cut funding before it began. He remembered sketching those beams, imagining light spilling across the floor exactly like it was now. Someone, Claire, had taken those old plans and used them to build warmth out of neglect. His lines had become her shelter. He felt something inside his throat close tight. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice startled him. He turned to find Elliot standing beside him, camera hanging at his side. Up close, the man's eyes were kind, the kind that carried weather. Ethan nodded faintly. You found that drawing? Claire did, Elliot said. Said she wanted to bring your idea back to life not for profit, but for people. She said the building just needed to remember what it was meant for. Ethan swallowed hard. I thought I know what you thought, Elliot said gently. You're not the first husband to mistake purpose for betrayal. Ethan let out a slow breath. You too? Elliot smiled, not offended. No. My wife passed 3 years ago. Cancer. Claire helped me get back on my feet. This, he gestured around the room, isn't about her or me. It's about second chances. Ethan nodded, eyes glistening. She's good at that. She is. Elliot agreed. She sees the good in your designs. Maybe start there. Ethan looked again at the children, at Claire's face open, alive, illuminated by the light filtering through old glass. For the first time, he didn't feel possessive. He felt grateful to witness her joy from the outside, to know she'd found something he hadn't built and couldn't own. He wanted to walk up, to say something, anything, but the words felt too small for what needed to be said. So, instead, he stayed where he was. Claire closed the book, the children clapping as she did the spider's final lines in a soft whisper. You have been my friend. That in itself is a tremendous thing. The applause filled the room, small hands clapping with pure delight. Claire smiled, and for a moment, Ethan saw the woman he'd fallen in love with long before the plans and projects, the woman who could make stillness feel alive. When the children began to gather their things, Ethan slipped quietly out the side door. He didn't want to disturb her space, not yet. He needed to earn that conversation. Outside, the wind off the harbor was brisk, tugging at his jacket. The sunlight danced on puddles, and in one of them, he caught his reflection older, yes, but softer around the edges. He walked along the dock, hands in his pockets, watching the gulls tilt in the wind. For the first time in years, the world around him didn't feel like something to fix. It just was imperfect, alive, enough. Behind him, laughter spilled from the depot children's voices, Claire's softer one, Elliot calling for a group photo. Ethan didn't look back, not yet. He wanted that image, her voice, that room, those lights to stay exactly as it was in his mind. A lighthouse built from his lines and her warmth, steady and shining for whoever needed it most. And somewhere deep inside, he knew he was one of them. Saturday began with the sound of rain easing off the roof, a soft patter giving way to calm. Ethan stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, looking out at the yard still glistening from the night storm. The cedar planks smelled of salt and earth. It was the same porch Claire used to talk about, the one she'd once imagined as their place to sit and do nothing at all. He set the mug down and took a slow breath. Then he began to work. The boards had been waiting in the garage for years, remnants from a renovation project he never finished. He hauled them out one by one, laying them across sawhorses. The morning air was cool enough to sting his fingers, but he didn't rush. For once, he didn't want to. He measured twice, sometimes 3 times before every cut. The sawdust curled up in ribbons, drifting like pale smoke in the sunlight. He sanded each board by hand, running his palm along the grain until it felt like skin. He counted the chain links aloud, 32 on each side, even, balanced. It wasn't perfection he was after this time. It was care. At noon, he took a break, sitting on the porch steps, the smell of sawdust clinging to his clothes. Across the yard, the ocean shimmered through gaps in the trees. He thought of Claire's letter. "I wanted a place for us to be still." He whispered into the wind, "I'm sorry it took me this long." The afternoon wore on. The house, usually too quiet, hummed faintly with the rhythm of his work, the scrape of sandpaper, the soft thud of hammer against wood. He built slowly, like a man praying through motion. When his hands cramped, he wandered into the garage for a wrench, and that's when he saw them. 3 cardboard boxes stacked neatly in the corner, labeled in Claire's handwriting, Sonnets, Steinbeck, Seniors. He crouched beside them, brushing off a thin layer of dust. Inside, there were lesson plans, paperbacks, and class notes. On one folder she'd written in red pen, "Find joy before you teach it." He sat back on his heels, surrounded by her words, the smell of paper and chalk dust mixing with sawdust and oil. It felt almost sacred, like sitting in pews built out of her old hopes. One small envelope slipped free of a folder. Inside was a photo of her standing before a whiteboard, mid-laugh. Students' heads turned toward her. She looked alive, not because she was smiling for the camera, but because she was seen. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he carefully put it back. The sun dipped low, painting the porch gold. He returned to the swing, tightening bolts, checking balance. His hands moved slower now, not from fatigue, but from reverence. When he finally attached the chains to the ceiling hooks, the metal groaned softly, then settled. He eased himself onto the swing. It held. The movement was smooth, a gentle back and forth that creaked like a heartbeat. He sat there as dusk fell, the air cooling, crickets beginning their faint chorus. The swing rocked beneath him, carrying both the weight of guilt and the strange lightness of doing something right, even if too late. For the first time since she'd left, he didn't fill the silence. He let it be what it was, a space wide enough for forgiveness to find its way in. Inside, he made dinner nothing fancy, just leftover soup and bread. He didn't eat much. The phone on the counter stayed dark, but he didn't check it. The message he'd sent that morning, "Tell me where to start," still sat unanswered. And that was okay. He'd learned that some answers take their time. By midnight, he turned off every light except the one on the porch. The swing glowed faintly under it, moving in the ocean breeze. He picked up his phone again, opened the camera, and snapped a picture. The image showed the swing, empty, framed by the doorway of the house they'd built together, the light spilling out like an invitation. He typed slowly, "It's here if you want to sit. No emojis, no apology, just that." He stared at the message for a long time before pressing send. Then he set the phone face down on the table and walked outside. The wind had shifted warmer now, carrying the scent of salt and lilacs from the neighbor's yard. He lowered himself onto the swing again, the chains sighing softly under his weight. He pushed gently with his feet, letting the motion carry him. The house behind him glowed from a single lamp through the window no longer empty, not yet whole. He imagined her sitting here one day. Maybe not soon, maybe not at all, but someday. He imagined saying nothing, just sharing the silence she'd asked for years ago. The swing creaked, steady and patient. Ethan looked out toward the sea, where the horizon blurred into night. The moonlight glinted faintly off the chains, small silver threads holding him between what was and what might still be. He closed his eyes and let the swing move, forward and back, until the rhythm felt like breathing. somewhere in the dark. A text tone chimed, one soft note breaking the still air. He didn't reach for it yet. He just kept swinging, his hands resting open on his knees, listening to the house breathe again. By mid-afternoon, the wind had changed, the kind of wind that didn't just move air but rearranged it. Ethan felt it before he saw the warning crawl across the TV. Nor'easter alert. Coastal flooding. Expected? The porch swing creaked outside, swaying on its own, its chains singing low. He stepped onto the porch, watching the sky fold in on itself. The horizon had disappeared. The ocean was the same color as the clouds, a vast, heaving gray. Then his phone buzzed. Jenna. He answered on the first ring. Yeah. Her voice came in, choppy, panicked. Ethan, have you heard from Claire? She left an hour ago to check the depot. They said the wind's pushing the tide inland. I tried calling, but he was already pulling on his boots. I'm on my way. Please be careful, Jenna said, her voice cracking. She said she'd just be a minute. He didn't answer. The line went dead. In minutes, he had the truck running, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. The wipers beat a frantic rhythm. Branches clawed at the windshield as he turned onto Harbor Road, where the wind came straight off the water. By the time he reached Main Street, the rain had turned sideways. Power lines swayed, and the stoplight over the intersection flailed like a loose arm. He could see the depot ahead, its outline barely visible through the storm, windows flickering in the dark. He parked as close as he dared, stepping into calf-deep water. The air was a roar wind, rain, and the far-off thunder of the tide pushing where it didn't belong. Inside the depot, the lights were out. A flashlight beam flickered weakly near the back. Claire's voice came faintly through the noise. No, 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 don't fall. He waded through the doorway, boots sloshing against the rising water. Claire. She turned sharply, soaked through, hair plastered to her face. Relief flashed in her eyes, quick, unguarded. The windows she shouted over the wind. They're giving way. He looked around. The children's books boxes and crates of them were stacked along the floor, water already licking at their edges. The old glass panes rattled violently. I brought tarps, he yelled, dropping the bundle from under his arm. Claire's breath caught, but she didn't waste a second. Together they moved, no hesitation, no argument. He hauled crates onto tables while she tied down corners of the tarp, their movements syncing as if they'd rehearsed it for years. When a gust slammed the front door open, Ethan braced it with his shoulder. The hinges screamed. Get the side window, he called. She nodded, pulling a milk crate beneath the sill to reach higher. Her hands shook, but her focus was unbroken. Lightning flashed through the room, revealing water pooling across the floor like spilled mercury. For a second, he saw her silhouette against it, determined, fierce, beautiful. When the next gust hit, the tarp ripped halfway down. Ethan grabbed it, pulling the edge tight again, their hands meeting for an instant. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but she didn't pull away. Where's Elliot? He shouted. Out-of-town photography thing in Boston. She answered, knotting the rope tighter. Of course. It figured she'd be here alone, trying to save every story in the room. He moved beside her, pressing his full weight against the window frame. You shouldn't have come out here. She shot him a quick look, rainwater streaking down her face. I wasn't going to let it flood. The kids' books, these are the only copies some of them ever get to take home. He wanted to argue, but all he could do was stare at her, the same fierce steadiness that had always terrified and amazed him. When the gusts finally eased, they both slumped back, breathless. The wind had dropped from a scream to a growl. Water still dripped from the ceiling, tapping against the tarp in irregular beats. Ethan wiped his forehead with the back of his sleeve. You okay? She nodded, chest heaving. I've been better. He managed a faint smile. The flashlight beam wavered, then died completely. They stood in semi-darkness, the only light coming from his truck headlights slanting through the open door. Rain blurred everything beyond into silver motion. Claire leaned against a stack of crates, shivering slightly. Ethan moved toward her without thinking, grabbing his jacket and draping it over her shoulders. She started to protest, then stopped. "Thanks," she murmured. He nodded, stepping back, his heart still hammering. Outside, the worst of the storm began to pass, the kind of lull that comes after fury, when the air feels strangely fragile, as if the world is deciding whether to rest or break again. Claire moved to check one last window. "We'll have to come back tomorrow to clean up." "We will," he said quietly. The we hung between them, unspoken but real. For the first time in months, maybe years, they didn't need to fill the silence. They just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, looking out over the harbor through the warped glass. The storm tide still surged, but the lights of Rockport flickered back on across the hill. One house, then another, tiny beacons against the dark. When he turned toward her, she was watching him, her eyes unreadable. "I didn't expect you," she said finally. "I didn't expect me either." The smallest smile touched her mouth, tired, grateful, maybe even proud. Ethan let the moment rest. He wanted to say everything: "I'm sorry, I'm learning, I still love you," but the storm outside had already said enough about what can break and still be saved. He reached for one of the last crates, hefted it onto the table. "We should go before the tide comes higher." She nodded. "You take the generator, I'll grab the rest." They moved in rhythm again. No wasted motion, no instructions, just two people who finally remembered how to build something together. As they stepped outside, the wind hit their faces with the damp breath of the sea. He glanced back at the depot, the light from his truck spilling through the doorway, illuminating the hanging tarps like sails on a steadying ship. For the first time in a long while, the sight didn't hurt. It just felt right unfinished. But standing, he turned toward her, water streaming from the brim of his cap. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you home." And though she didn't answer, she didn't refuse either. They walked through the rising mist, side by side, their shadows stretching long and wavering across the flooded street, two figures stitched together again by the very storm that almost tore them apart. By morning, the world was washed clean. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that mirrored the pale sky. The harbor was still swollen, but calm now, like a chest that had stopped heaving. Ethan parked outside the depot again, the truck bed still cluttered with ropes and tarps from the night before. Inside, the air smelled of wet paper and salt. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, catching dust that looked almost golden. Claire was already there, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, kneeling beside a row of drying books laid out on towels. She didn't look up when he entered, but she didn't flinch either. "Windows held," he said softly. "Barely." She picked up a soaked paperback, fanning the pages. "Kids'll be disappointed about the ruined ones." "I can replace them," he said. "All of them." She smiled faintly, still looking down. "You don't have to fix everything. Ethan." He hesitated. "That's kind of what I do." "That's the problem," she murmured, then, quieter. "Sometimes things need to dry on their own." He nodded, accepting the truth in it. The silence between them wasn't sharp anymore, just quiet, worn smooth by the night's work. Claire stood and crossed to a small desk in the corner, rummaging through a folder. "There's something I should show you," she said, "before you hear it from someone else." She pulled out a stack of papers held together with a binder clip, the kind she used for lesson plans. Across the top sheet, Rockport Literacy and Community Restoration Grant. His own name was listed under Architectural Framework Proposal. He blinked. "What is this?" "I filed it 3 months ago," she said. "Elliot helped me with the photos. It's a small grant for historic preservation and community literacy. You use my name, your designs," she corrected gently. "That old blueprint on the wall, it was enough to qualify as original architectural intent. I figured if the town saw your name attached, they'd pay attention." He stared at the papers. "You did this. For me, for us," she said quietly. "For what this town still needs. You forgot what your work could mean to people." "Ethan, I just wanted to remind you." He set the papers down, his hand lingering on them like they were fragile. I thought you were trying to get away from everything I built. She looked at him, then not angry, not even sad, just open. I wasn't running from you. I was running from the part of me that disappeared trying to keep you whole. He swallowed. And the ring. She took a breath. I left it because I needed to know who I was without it, not because I wanted to stop being yours. I just couldn't wear a promise I wasn't part of anymore. The words hit softly, but they shook something deep inside him, a recognition, a reckoning. He nodded slowly, as if his body understood before his mind did. Claire, he said finally, I've been building walls so long, I forgot what they were supposed to protect. You were right. I sanded everything smooth until nothing real could stick. She tilted her head, the faintest smile playing at her lips. You don't have to explain. Ethan, just do differently. He exhaled. I plan to... He reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a set of papers, 2 contracts with embossed logos. I was supposed to start these next month. Big builds, waterfront homes. They'd take all year. She recognized the name's luxury developments, the kind that always stole his weekends. You've wanted those for years. I don't anymore. He tore both contracts cleanly in half, the sound crisp and final. If I take them, I'll lose another year. I can't afford to lose. So, I called this morning, told them to find someone else. She blinked, stunned. You did that? He nodded. I can't build strangers' dreams when the one that mattered almost fell apart in my hands. Her eyes glistened, though she didn't cry. Ethan, that's not charity, he interrupted gently. Just priority. I'd rather spend weekends rebuilding this place with you. I owe that to the version of us that drew those first lines together. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of dripping water filled the room, slow, steady, patient. Claire turned away suddenly, rummaging through a drawer. When she came back, she was holding something small, the printed photo of the porch swing he'd sent her. The paper was slightly creased at the corners. Without a word. She crossed to the bulletin board near the entrance, found an empty space among children's drawings and grant notices, and pinned it there. The photo hung under a scrap of paper that read, Community Projects to be Continued. Ethan's throat tightened. What's that mean? She stepped back, folding her arms loosely. It means I saw it. It means keep building. He nodded, unable to speak. The morning light had shifted by then, golden, patient, alive. It streamed across the room, catching on the edges of the drying books, the wet floor, the paper pinned to the wall. The air smelled like rain and old timber and second chances. Claire reached for one of the damp books and held it open between them. The pages stuck together, but didn't tear. Look, she said softly. Still readable. Ethan met her eyes. So are we. She hesitated, then smiled small, tired, but real. Let's find out. They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, flipping through pages that had survived the storm, the sunlight warming their hands. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like fixing anything. He felt like listening, watching, being there, outside. A gull cried over the harbor, and the wind shifted inland softer now, carrying the scent of spring through the open doorway. And in that quiet space amid the drying pages, the creaking beams, and the faint hum of light returning something in both of them began, gently, to rebuild. The months didn't change everything at once. They never do. What they changed was how Ethan and Claire began again, slower, softer, like people relearning the language of touch after years of silence. It started with the sound of hammers again, but this time, the rhythm was shared, on Saturdays. They worked side by side at the depot. She sorted books and painted signs while he repaired the warped floorboards. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. When they did, their voices carried that tentative ease of people learning how to trust the pauses. In therapy, something Ethan swore he'd never do. Miriam Cole taught them how to name the small things before they turned heavy. Claire laughed once after a session, saying, You can draft a blueprint faster than you can say what you feel. He'd grinned. Blueprints don't argue back. She'd nudged his arm. Neither do people who stop trying. They were getting better at trying. The depot became their shared heartbeat. By summer, it was half-transformed bright walls, shelves brimming with donations, the smell of varnish and stories in the air. Children came every afternoon, tracking sand across the floor, reading aloud to whoever would listen. Ethan learned to ask before fixing things. When a shelf wobbled, he turned to Claire. "You want me to brace that? Or do you like the tilt?" She'd smile. "Let it tilt a little. Feels human." And when he forgot, when his old habits of control snuck in, she no longer swallowed her frustration. "Ethan," she'd say evenly, "you don't have to make it perfect to make it matter." He'd take a breath, nod, and start again, slower, this time. They were small lessons, but they added up, like the way he learned to stay when conversations turned uncomfortable, the way she learned to ask for help without dressing it in apology, the way their silences began to sound less like walls and more like rest. By autumn, the town began to notice. The Harbor Readers Program expanded into evening sessions for adults, fishermen learning to write letters to their grandchildren, mothers tracing words by candlelight. Elliot's photos lined the back wall, children reading under string lights, elders smiling with borrowed books in hand. One afternoon, Elliot arrived with a new framed print wrapped in brown paper. "For you two," he said. "A little thank you." They opened it together. The photograph showed the depot's new porch, sunlight falling across a row of children on the swing, books in their laps, laughter frozen mid-air. In the background, through the window, Ethan and Claire could be seen working side by side, blurred but unmistakably together. Below the image, in neat handwriting, Elliot had titled it, "Scene." Claire blinked fast, her eyes shining. Ethan traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. "You caught something," he murmured. Elliot smiled. Didn't have to. It was already there. They hung the photo above the entry table, where everyone would pass beneath it. For weeks afterward, Ethan would glance at it each time he left, as if checking to make sure it was still real. Life didn't turn flawless. Some days, the old silences crept back, thick with fatigue and memory. But now, they knew how to name them. They'd sit on the porch swing after long days in with coffee, her with tea, and let the air fill what words couldn't. That fall, the maples turned crimson early. The air sharpened. The porch smelled of cedar and cold sea. One evening, Claire stepped outside while Ethan was hanging a final string of lights over the swing. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Almost done," he said. "You'll have to tell me if it's crooked." She smiled faintly. "I'll let it tilt a little." They sat down, side by side, the chains creaking softly. The yard glittered with damp leaves, the harbor beyond silvering in the dusk. Claire reached into her pocket. For a moment, Ethan thought she was pulling out her phone, but instead she opened her hand. The gold ring lay there, catching the porch light. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about promises." He looked at her, heart in his throat. "You once said we'd fix everything," she continued, "but I don't want to fix us. I want to keep choosing us even when it's messy, especially then." She turned the ring between her fingers. "So, if we keep choosing—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Ethan reached out, not to take it, but to hold her hand beneath it. The ring glinted between their palms. "Every day," he said softly. For a long while, they sat like that. The ring warm now between their hands, the swing rocking gently, the night pressing close but not cold. When she finally slipped it back on, it wasn't a grand moment, no applause, no music, just two people who had learned that love, like carpentry, is built in layers planned, sanded, tested, and held together not by nails, but by patience. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You still measure everything." He smiled. "Not everything, just what I want to keep." The swing creaked. The lights hummed faintly above them. Inside, the depot clock chimed one slow note marking the hour, the kind of sound that, months ago, would have echoed through emptiness. Now, it settled into something whole. Elliot's photo caught a flicker of that light through the window, freezing them in silhouette, not perfect, not posed, but seen. And for the first time since the house was built, Ethan felt no need to hold his breath. He'd finally learned what a home really sounded like when it was alive. The morning of the grand opening began with sunlight spilling through the depot's tall windows, golden and forgiving. The smell of lemon oil, paper, and new paint filled the air, the scent of beginnings disguised as ordinary work. Ethan arrived early, carrying folding chairs from the truck, his boots tracking faint prints across the clean floor. Claire was already there, fussing with tablecloths, pinning signs, adjusting the flowers she'd gathered from the yard. "Looks good," he said, setting down a chair. She turned, cheeks flushed, a strand of hair falling from her clip. "You always say that before you fix something." He smiled. Not this time. She paused, studying him, the steadiness in his tone, the softness behind it, and nodded. "Okay then." By mid-morning, the first people began to arrive. A bell above the door jingled each time someone stepped in, children tugging at sleeves, mothers balancing pies, old men with caps damp from the fog. The town of Rockport, every face he'd built for, argued with, or passed in the grocery store, seemed to show up at once. Jenna came in last, carrying a tray of cookies and an armful of hugs. She went straight to Claire, squeezing her hand. "Look at this place," she whispered. "You did it." "We did it," Claire said softly. Glancing toward Ethan, Sam Ortega ambled in behind Jenna, his ever-present grin beneath his gray mustache. "Guess you finally found a use for those blueprints." "Boss," he said, clapping Ethan's shoulder. Ethan chuckled. "Guess so." Sam leaned closer. "She looks happy." "She is," Ethan said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "So am I." Outside, the wind lifted faintly, carrying the scent of the sea through the open door, the sound of gulls mixed with laughter and the rustle of turning pages. The depot had never been this alive. When it was time, Claire took her place at the front. A hush fell over the crowd. She held a worn copy of Charlotte's Web, the same one from that first day months ago. "Welcome to Harbor Readers," she said, her voice steady but tender. This place began as an idea. Then it became a blueprint. And now, she looked around, her eyes shining. Now it's a home for stories for anyone who needs one. Applause rippled through the room. Ethan sat near the back, hands resting loosely on his knees. For once, he wasn't calculating angles or mentally correcting imperfections. He was just watching the way her eyes lit when she read, the way the children leaned forward, the way the sunlight found its way through the high glass and landed right where she stood, like the world itself knew what it was seeing. She began reading aloud, her voice threading through the space. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both. Something inside Ethan loosened, a quiet warmth rising from somewhere deep. Around him, people smiled, heads tilted, the entire room caught in the small miracle of shared silence. He glanced up at the blueprint still taped to the wall, his old lines, faded and smudged, the ones that had started all of this. Over it now hung Elliot's photo, seen, the light forever frozen across that porch. When the reading ended, the crowd broke into applause, the kind that comes not from politeness, but from recognition. Everyone knowing they'd witnessed something bigger than a story. Afterward, there were pies on the table, coffee cups clinking, children darting between shelves. Claire moved through the crowd, laughing, accepting congratulations with grace and disbelief. Ethan stayed mostly on the edges, content just to take it in. When the last guests drifted out, the depot grew quiet again, a different kind of quiet this time, full and content. The golden light had turned amber, the harbor outside shimmered like liquid glass. Claire was wiping down the counter when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, smiled softly. The message was short. You were luminous. Ethan caught the expression on her face. And this time, he smiled too. He didn't have to ask. He knew. Elliot's E wasn't a man's claim, it was an artist's eye, a friend's pride, and he wasn't threatened by it anymore. He reached for a small notepad from the counter, the kind the volunteers used to log book donations, and tore off a page. His handwriting was rough, a carpenter's scrawl. He wrote, "I'm here, E." He left it where her phone had been and walked outside. The evening had cooled, the light thinning toward dusk. He sat on the porch swing, the same one he'd built with bare hands and late-night repentance. The swing moved gently under his weight, the chains whispering against the beams. He looked out toward the water, where the tide rolled in, slow and steady, like breath. A moment later, the door creaked open. Claire stepped outside, the paper note in her hand. She didn't say anything, just eased onto the swing beside him. The air smelled of lemon oil and sea salt, pages and home. They rocked in silence, their shoulders touching lightly. Down the hill, the harbor lights began to blink on one by one, tiny fires in the dark. Ethan glanced at her. "How'd it go, Ms. Caldwell?" She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Ask the kids. They're the only critics I care about." He laughed softly. "They'll give you 5 stars. The swing creaked, the tide breathed, the town exhaled, and somewhere inside the depot behind them, a book closed with the sound of something ending and beginning again. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, not in the grand apologies or the perfect endings, but in the quiet work of showing up again. Ethan and Claire's story reminds us that love isn't something we finish. It's something we keep rebuilding, board by board, day by day. We lose each other not through anger, but through silence, through the moments we stop listening, stop seeing, stop choosing. Yet, even the most weathered hearts can find their way back when honesty becomes more important than pride. A house, no matter how beautiful, is only a shell until someone fills it with forgiveness. And sometimes, it takes a storm, real or otherwise, to remind us how to breathe again inside the life we've built. Maybe that's what love truly is, not perfection, but presence. Not a promise carved in stone, but a swing that keeps moving, held by hands that refuse to let go, no matter how strong the wind becomes. Thank you for being here with us. Every like, share, and subscribe helps us keep this little corner of light alive, a place where stories remind us what it means to be human, to forgive, and to begin again. Your presence here means more than you know. Together, we can keep telling stories that touch the soul, one heart at a time.